Pressure campaign on South Africa is full and unrelenting, with the executive order charging that the Expropriation Act signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa was a shocking disregard for its citizens' rights by enabling the government to seize ethnic minority Afrikaners' agricultural property without compensation. It further alleged government actions fueling disproportionate violence against racially disfavored landowners.
Trade restrictions are meant to protect domestic industries. But when new executive orders hit South Africa's exports, the results surprised many. Instead of collapse, South African businesses adapted, new markets opened, and trade flows shifted. Here's how a policy meant to apply pressure ended up reshaping global trade dynamics.
The United States President has issued a series of trade-related executive orders targeting South Africa, a move that immediately sent ripples through global markets and raised concerns among international trade partners. While the measures were framed as part of a broader effort to protect domestic industries and rebalance trade relationships, their impact quickly extended beyond bilateral ties, triggering reactions across agriculture, manufacturing, and export-driven sectors worldwide. The executive orders focus on tightening trade conditions between the United States and South Africa, particularly in areas where South African exports have gained strong footholds in American markets. The measures include revised tariff structures on selected agricultural products, additional compliance requirements for manufactured goods, and a reassessment of preferential trade access that South African exporters previously enjoyed. While the stated goal is to support United States producers, analysts note that the scope of the orders affects supply chains that are deeply interconnected across continents. South Africa's agricultural sector is among the most directly affected. Products such as citrus, wine, nuts, and certain processed foods have long been competitive in the United States market due to quality, pricing, and seasonal advantages. Under the new executive orders, several of these exports face higher duties or more stringent entry requirements, raising costs for importers and creating uncertainty for exporters who rely on stable access to overseas buyers. Manufacturing is also impacted, particularly in areas such as automotive components, metals, and industrial inputs. South African manufacturers that supply intermediate goods to United States companies now face delays and increased compliance costs. These changes disrupt long-standing trade flows and add pressure to firms already navigating a complex global trade environment shaped by shifting alliances and economic nationalism. The immediate reaction from global markets was cautious. Currency markets showed volatility as investors reassessed exposure to emerging market economies linked to United States trade. Commodity prices fluctuated as traders anticipated possible supply gaps, especially in agricultural goods where South Africa plays a seasonal balancing role. Equity markets in export-dependent sectors reflected uncertainty, with investors closely watching how governments and industries would respond. International observers expressed concern that the executive orders could signal a broader trend toward restrictive trade policies. Trade partners warned that such measures often produce unintended consequences, including higher consumer prices and retaliatory actions that disrupt global commerce. Multinational companies with operations spanning the United States and Africa flagged potential disruptions to logistics, sourcing, and long-term investment planning. In South Africa, the initial response acknowledged the seriousness of the situation without escalating tensions. Government officials emphasized dialogue, adherence to international trade rules, and the importance of maintaining diversified economic relationships. Business leaders and farming associations voiced concern over short-term challenges, but also highlighted the country's experience in adapting to external shocks. South African farmers, in particular, moved quickly to reassess export strategies. Rather than waiting for prolonged negotiations, many exporters accelerated efforts to redirect shipments to alternative markets. Existing trade relationships within Africa, Asia, and the Middle East gained renewed attention, while partnerships with BRICS-aligned economies became increasingly central to export planning. Africa's growing consumer base offered immediate opportunities. Regional trade agreements made it easier for South African producers to expand sales to neighboring countries, reducing reliance on distant markets. Asian markets, already familiar with South African agricultural products, absorbed increased volumes as exporters adjusted pricing and logistics. In the Middle East, Demand for food imports remained strong, providing another outlet for goods previously destined for the United States. Manufacturers followed a similar path. Companies diversified supply chains and sought new buyers in regions prioritizing industrial growth and infrastructure development. While the transition required investment and coordination, many firms reported that expanded market access reduced long-term vulnerability to policy shifts in any single country. As these adjustments unfolded, analysts began to note signs that the executive orders were producing unintended effects within the United States itself. Importers faced higher costs for goods that had few immediate substitutes, leading to price increases that were passed on to consumers. Agricultural processors and retailers reported supply constraints, particularly for products where South Africa had been a reliable off-season supplier. United States farmers were also affected. In some cases, higher tariffs on South African inputs disrupted production cycles, especially where local alternatives were more expensive or less available. Export-oriented farmers faced the risk of retaliation or reduced access to overseas markets as trade partners reconsidered their exposure to United States agricultural products. Economists highlighted trade gaps emerging as a result of the policy shift. Reduced imports did not always translate into increased domestic production, creating shortages rather than protection. These gaps underscored the complexity of modern trade, where efficiency often depends on global specialization rather than self-sufficiency. Meanwhile, South Africa's export data began to show gradual stabilization. Although sales to the United States declined in targeted sectors, overall export volumes were supported by growth elsewhere. Diversification efforts helped cushion revenue losses, and in some cases, exporters achieved better margins in new markets with lower logistical barriers and stronger demand growth. Strategically, the situation encouraged South Africa to deepen regional integration and strengthen global partnerships beyond traditional Western markets. Investments in port infrastructure, logistics corridors, and trade facilitation gained momentum as policymakers prioritized resilience and competitiveness. Businesses adapted by innovating product offerings and aligning standards with a broader range of international requirements. Experts offered balanced perspectives on the developments. Some warned that prolonged trade restrictions could slow growth and strain smaller exporters with limited resources. Others argued that diversification, while challenging, ultimately strengthens economic foundations by reducing dependence on any single trading partner. Most agreed that adaptability would determine long-term outcomes. From a global standpoint, the episode reinforced a recurring lesson in trade policy. Actions designed to protect domestic interests can reverberate across borders and return in unexpected ways. Supply chains respond quickly, markets adjust, and countries with flexible strategies often find new opportunities amid disruption. As the dust begins to settle, South Africa appears positioned not as a passive victim of trade policy shifts, but as an active participant reshaping its economic trajectory. The initial shock prompted faster diversification, stronger regional ties, and renewed engagement with emerging markets. While challenges remain, the adjustments undertaken have laid the groundwork for greater resilience. The broader takeaway is clear. Trade restrictions may create short-term leverage, but in a globalized economy, adaptability often proves more powerful than isolation. The executive orders triggered global shockwaves, yet they also accelerated strategic changes that leave South Africa more diversified, more connected, and better prepared for future uncertainty.